Thank you. Thanks, Alex. Now I know what I'm going to talk about. The last 2 days I've been like, what do you want me to talk about? You know. It's really nice to be back in San Diego. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to come in and, listen and everything. I just thought I would throw this out. I've been here before several times. My cousin's right here visiting. Our families were like kind of close growing up and stuff. I grew up in San Mateo, and my cousin was there like to help take care of me when I had my wisdom teeth taken out in Tijuana. Came back across. His dad brokered the deal. And so I came back and was watching movies at their house for a couple days. My face all swollen up. So anyway, I've been to San Diego before. So I just wanted to give you guys like some ground rules for the talk. The first thing is I'm probably going to swear. I always try not to, and I kind of screw it up. So be ready for that. The second thing is that you can laugh. Sometimes when I go to arts talks, I'm not sure if I can laugh because I don't know if the person's like saying that meant to be funny. You can laugh like at the pieces. You can laugh at me. Either way, that's fine. The third thing is please do not make eye contact with me. I see it as a threat, and I will attack you. This is about 2 years ago in LA, or 3 years ago now. We bought this giant sign. It's in the back of this rental truck. Barely fit, and basically I went around with a couple guys that were helping out, and we put this in public places, and then I would kind of come up really quickly with a message to put on it. So the first place we went to was the beach, and the lifeguard came over, and he's like, "Do you guys have a permit?" And I was like, "No," And he's like, "You gotta have a photo permit or something. We can't let you do this." And I was like, "Well, I'm leaving town tomorrow. There's like not really enough time for me to get a permit. Can I just really quickly take a picture? And we'll be out of here in 15 minutes. By the way, what's your name? My name's Steve." I just started shaking his hand, trying to make friends. And he's like, "Look, you can't write that on here because at the time we said open 24 hours." He's like, "We're not open 24 hours. We close at sunset." And that was like his main issue. So we changed it. Available 7 days, talked to him a little bit longer. He's like, "If I come back here in 15 minutes and you guys are here, you're in a lot of trouble," which I took as a form of permission. And we got the photo and took off. We went to kind of a wealthy neighborhood next. This was really fast, just in and out. The next one was this empty car lot. And then this is the Veterans Cemetery. I love the stifled laughter. So, like, people start to laugh, and it's like, "Oh, no, I didn't mean to laugh." So this is like just some work that I've done. I wanted to throw that out there first. So my favorite poem, I don't really like poems. I only know one poem that I can recite off the top of my head. It's not really my wheelhouse. But it's about utopia, and I don't know who wrote it. I forgot the guy's name. But he said that utopia exists on the horizon, and when I take one step towards it, it takes one step back. When I take 2 steps towards it, it takes 2 steps back. And what's the good of utopia? It's good for walking. And I, for years before that, had said that in my work I was creating temporary utopias. And I told this one time to Stuart Ewan, who's like this cultural theorist guy, and we were in a bar. And he's like, "That's good, because the people who try to make permanent utopias usually are fascists." And I was like, "Yeah, small scale, it exists for a little bit, and then it goes away." So I wanted to show you some examples of those. The idea here, again, the value, the good for walking thing is, a lot of times we can get involved in these like arguments where it's like, I see things this way, I see things this way, and usually what I can do with the Utopia project is be like, "Look up here." And so these are examples of some of those projects. This guy, Edward Bellamy, in 1887, wrote a book about the year 2000 from 1887. It was called Looking Backward, and it was one of the most popular books of its day. So much so that these clubs emerged where they would get together and talk about how to make the things in the book real. So the book is, you can read it if you want. It's like, as literature, it's kind of lousy. Like, this guy falls asleep and he wakes up and he's in the future. And then the whole like narrative structure is him walking around with his tour guide who decides to show him the world in 2000. I think it's Boston. And he's like, what's that? And then the tour guide will be like, oh, it's this. This is how it works now. He's like, that's fascinating. And then they'll go to the next place. How does this work? And the chapter after chapter of what's that? This is how it works. But it was like this whole socialist vision of how the future could work. And so there were some really interesting things, like there were reduced working hours for people. Everyone retires with full benefits at age 45. Sounds pretty nice. You can eat in any public kitchen at any time. And it criticizes the stock market. It was one of the first books to like predict the idea of a credit card or debit card. And other technologies, like you would order products from a screen in your home. This is like 1887. This is the first book where that shows up. And so anyway, these clubs popped up where people would get together and like talk about how this vision was so great and how they could do it. And it was like, there were a lot of other books in this genre. There's one I'm reading now called News from Nowhere. Utopia translated in Greek is nowhere, no place. So anyway, okay, so love this book, love the idea of like presenting this other idea of the future, and then, I think that's what art can do, is like it provides this vision, and then people, because we get stuck in like our everyday lives of like how things normally work. So for example, like video games, this is a video game that I made called Simmer Down Sprinter, and it's a 2-player sit-down arcade game, and it measures your stress level on that little hand thing, right? So it uses the same kind of like lie detector technology, which you can buy on eBay for $15. And on the screen, well, I'll show you a video of how it works. So on the screen, it shows you how well you're doing. You're in a race against the other person. So as you relax, the faster you go in the game. You'll see how it works here. So you're competing against the other person you're sitting next to. One person's like on the red side, one person's on the blue side. The players like are me. Let me turn this down. And it takes quarters, because I found that when I played video games, like the minute I put the quarter in, I'm like, oh, I'm going to beat this thing. If it was free, I didn't really care as much. But this is to get you like psyched up to play the game.
Simmer Down Sprinter.
So the more relaxed you are in the game, the faster you go. And you can see on the screen, it'll tell you who's first and who's second, so you know where you are in the competition. There's a stress meter on the bottom right. And so he's...
You're really stressed out, Richard.
That's me, yeah.
Oh, that one went backwards.
In a running outfit. So if you like start laughing, that also sort of reads as a form of stress or excitement, and you'll do worse. So you're really cool there and you're going fast. Now they've sort of stressed out, and so if you go really stressed out, you go backwards, which also tends to stress people out. So the game goes pretty good, and usually until the last quarter, and people realize that they're winning, and then they start to get excited about that, and then they start to lose. I found I could beat my brother by like right as he was about to cross the finish line. I'd ask him when him and his girlfriend were going to get married. So that's the game, and it's meant to be like super fun. But you know, the thing that was a little more subtle about it, the second layer, is like, you know, everything's red, white, and blue, and really I'm in a competition with myself. You know, as you are in a competition with yourself, if you get obsessed with beating the other person, you will lose, right? If you stop caring, like that guy Richard did, and kind of put his head down and stop looking, like that's how people usually did really well. And the idea with the game was like, all right, so you know, there's this way that the world works, and you could have two parallel lines, right? And if you walk along these two parallel lines for like hundreds and hundreds of feet, they're always going to be on top of each other. But if you could like bump one of them at one point, eventually, over time, it'll get a little bit wider, and then it'll start to stray, right? You go hundreds of feet, and maybe it's moved over a quarter of an inch. Go thousands of feet, and it's, you know, several inches, and then you keep going, and like eventually those lines are worlds apart, right? So what if you kind of bumped one of these, you know, the metaphorical line of a video game, of what a video game does, the purpose, you know, and then like how does that sort of play out in the future? Why are games the way that they are? How could they be different? And can you make a game that would train people to sort of not compete, you know? And so, so in building this was like this idea of like this other parallel world, and to really take people there where they're playing the game and they're competing, and not just like talk about it as like some sort of stoner conversation really late at night about like, what if video games do this? But like actually make it and have people sit there and play it. So made the game, put it out in the world, and interestingly enough, this was a project I did while I was in grad school. And one of the faculty members came and said, Steve, this is really great. This is the least didactic work you've ever made. And which is like, fuck you, you know, like, thanks a lot. But I was like, actually, it's the most didactic work I've ever made. You just don't. It's even more so because you don't even see it, you know, like it's totally teaching. That's what this piece is all about, teaching in so many ways. And you like it because you don't know that, or it doesn't register. Okay, so a few years later, I did another project. I started this thing called the Anti-Advertising Agency. It took on the sort of form of a business. I told people I was the CEO, which turns out you could just do. You don't really have to have a license or anything. And I got a grant, and I hired artists to work with me as like, you know, they were project managers and stuff. We would collaborate on projects. So this anti-advertising agency did projects with other artists, different campaigns, and we did about 6 or so. And it was just all different artists collaborating with me on a project about advertising and public space and how it affects culture. So one we did was with the Graffiti Research Lab, which they made tools for graffiti artists, hackers, you know, people in urban space to basically, like, the idea is that spray paint is the primary tool of a graffiti artist, but what if they were the Q to James Bond, you know, like they were as Q is to James Bond, the Graffiti Research Lab is to graffiti artists, right? They're like, hey, James Bond, come check this out. Here's a way you can spray paint 40 feet in the air, you know? So anyway, this was in a lab. We all worked together making, and I worked with them. And the idea was like innovation and tools for graffiti artists. So this was a project that we did together in New York, and I think. interesting things I learned in this. One was like what I call like a judo technique, you know. And the idea with judo is really low effort to get a high impact. So, and using the force of a more powerful opponent against them. So rather than try to compete with these advertisers, I'll talk about this in a minute, rather than try to compete with the advertisers and create something that's like flashy and you know, these massive video displays, like we can't really compete with that, but we can use theirs and just like add this piece of cardboard and do something else with it that talks about it, right? So rather than try to compete, we just use their power against them. Judo. The other thing was that, like in real life, maybe several thousand people saw this, but within a few days after making this video, like hundreds of thousands of people had seen it. And it was the first time with my work where that flip was like so immediate. Usually, you know, over time, there would be more people that saw the project online over, you know, months and months. But this was like within days. And so I used this stuff later on. But I wanted to talk about hacking because that was something that we did at IBeam, which is where the graffiti research lab was, where I operated the anti-advertising agency for a long time. And like, you know, usually think of hacking as like, you know, somebody breaking into the bank and like siphoning off several cents off of every transaction, becoming a millionaire, and then like going to Barbados or something. I don't know. You know, like the kind of thing that's presented in the news is like, this was hacked. It's like somebody broke into it and did something illegally. But the original definition of hacking was exploring something with a spirit of playful curiosity, right? Trying to make things do things they weren't supposed to do. So if you took a tool that was meant to, like a hammer, right? And instead you used it to make a toy or, you know, as a doorstop, that was a hack, right? And so at IBeam, we were trying to do hacking for the common good. And so anyway, identifying, exploiting vulnerabilities in existing systems to hijack their intended uses. Whether it's using as a hammer as a doorstop, that's like one example. But, you know, and it also includes breaking into the bank. We also had this sort of DIY thing, which was rooted in punk rock and so on. I'm just going to skip through this and try to turn that into a do-it-together idea, which was like, you know, we worked on a lot of open source projects. IBeam, when I was there, was for the Open Lab. And the idea was open source technology for an R&D lab for the public. So there's R&D labs for Victoria's Secret. There's R&D labs for Ford and Chevy and all the automakers. We are the R&D lab for the public, right? And we released all of our research and all of our development was given away for free. So again, the ideas here were like generosity, service, and empowerment. Tools for graffiti artists, you know, like tools for the general public, all given away for free, all done in a spirit of service. Along those lines, this is another project I did called I Will Talk with Anyone About Anything for free. Really low tech by comparison. The other one's pretty low tech too. And I would set this up usually around where other people were tabling, giving away free literature, you know. And people would form lines to talk to me. And then I would say, actually, why don't you two talk to each other that are waiting in line, you know. So this also, I turned into an instruction set. And so other people could do it, and they would. Those were like some suggestions if people didn't know what to talk about. It was just to get things started, you know. It wasn't like a rule book or anything. And then other people would do it, and like the project's been repeated in other countries and stuff. It's kind of, and it's like, it's crazy. Okay, so another project. I'm just going to blaze through these. Yeah, okay, Emma Goldman. So the Graduate School of Management building at UC Davis, how do they connect? So when I was at UC Davis, they were expanding the campus, and because it's a state school, it's like any state highway project, they have to say what they're doing, who funded it, as you can see on the sign here, like when it's happening, so on and so forth. It's just informational sign, right? So I saw this, and I was like, what are private enterprise and gift funds? That just means they got donations, right? So, and it was 2006, I think, when I saw this. I'm like, there's no ground broken here. This is not happening, you know? And so basically the sign was a promoting the idea of this building that they wanted to build. And I was like, okay, well, if that's possible, I would like to do the same thing for a building that I would like to build. And so I made the Emmett Goldman Institute for Anarchist Studies. Gave it a really big budget because I figured they would probably try to cut it pretty early. And it had some stuff that the UC system actually had, which was an anarchist paper special collection. There was an Emmett Goldman Papers project at UC Berkeley already. So some of this stuff was viable, but the 24-hour Kropotkin Cafe, it's kind of unheard of on the campus. The Emmett Goldman Dance Studio, stretch. And basically I would take this and put it in fields where they were doing construction to promote the idea. What's that? I've never been arrested in my life. I like to say that, being a white guy helps a lot. But I used to arrest people for a living. Me and Mike actually had that job together. I was a private security agent for the Stanford University. And so I've arrested people before. This is a long story. I've arrested professors, Stanford professors, which was great. All kinds of people, but I'm like super comfortable with cops because I'm like, I know what this is like. I know you're faking it just like I was. And so that helps in talking to police. So I've had many conversations with police, and I've never been arrested. I talked myself out of Grand Theft Auto one time, but that's another story. Okay, so also in the Bay Area, this was another sort of utopia project. Lawrence Livermore Lab competed with Los Alamos to make every nuclear weapon that the United States has ever made. It's located 40 miles east of Oakland. It's in Livermore. Kind of could be a nice area. This is what the property looks like. This is also a print that I made of the aerial view, which turns out you can get at the library. Kind of surprising. But basically, I mapped out where all the streets and the buildings were and vegetation and so on. And then I set up this installation where people could draw what they wanted to do with the land, right? So the idea was that we have sworn that we would disarm. We've signed treaties that said that we are going to disarm. What we've done instead, we've said that in all of our nuclear weapons, as they sort of expire, right, those will be taken out of the arsenal until we have none left. But what we do is just rebuild them, like just over and over, rebuild. So nothing ever falls out of service. And that's part of what they do at Lawrence Livermore. So, but anyway, we've promised that we would disarm, and the idea is like, okay, well, someday, soon, hopefully, we're going to have this 1.3 square miles of land and $1.6 billion every year to do something with. What could we do with it? So I'd give people these posters, say, what do you want to do with this land? What do you want to do with the money? And they would draw all kinds of things, like the big green one is an 18-hole golf course. The one to the right of it is a roller coaster that goes across the whole thing, where you're given a bag of these mushroom spores, and you throw them out of the roller coaster as you ride along, and they're those mushrooms that leach toxins out of soil, and remediate the land. This one on the far right has a bunch of canals, so it's all flooded, and you can row around the whole campus. And in it is a center, an institute for the study of why people are afraid to dance. So it's like all kinds of stuff, super serious, some really silly, but basically people could set up and they could draw whatever they wanted, right? So whatever they wanted to do with this place once it got turned into civilian use again. And what would happen is I would come over to people and be like, how's it going? Do you understand the project? Do you understand what you're doing? They say, yeah, I get to do whatever I want with this land in Livermore. It sounds awesome. I'd say, great. Have you figured out how to spend $1.6 billion? And they would say, oh, I didn't really think about that. Okay, let me figure that out. I'm going to build a roller coaster. I'm going to do this. I'm going to flood the land. So I'd come back after a little while. I'm like, how's it going? They're like, okay, yeah, I got, I'm doing this over here. I'm doing this over here. This is for this. Figured out how to spend the money. I'm doing all this stuff. And I'd say, great. What are you going to do the second year? I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like, every year you get $1.6 billion. What are you going to do the second year? And they're like, what do you mean every year, $1.6 billion? What do they do at this place? And I would say, they maintain our nuclear weapons stockpile. And they're like, why? And I'm like, I don't know why. And they'd say, this is fucked up. And I would say, I know. And that was the idea. It's like, I could make a whole installation and be like, this is fucked up and you should be angry. And nobody would listen to me. But I could make this whole experience, right, where they got to dream of what this place could be. And then they would get mad because it wasn't like that. And that was like much more interesting. I did the same thing with the Department of Defense, but it's called the Department of Fill in the Blank. That's just to give you an idea of the scale of the Pentagon. It's a pretty big place. And it was the same thing where people could draw what they wanted for the Pentagon. They could give their own, instead of the Army and the Navy and the $439 billion every year that goes to the Department of Defense, not including the black budget, not including the wars, not including the stuff for the nuclear weapons that's actually classified in the Department of Energy, just the 439 for defense. And you could reallocate that. This actually was a little bit more overwhelming for people. They had a harder time with it. But you can see that wall back there full of different people's ideas of what to do with it. Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead. There's a bunch of other things, but, I only have so much time. I'm going to squeeze two things in. So, do you guys see the Yes Men when they were here? All right, so some of this might overlap. We worked together on this. So, I'm hanging out in a bar with this guy, Steve Duncombe, not Ronald McDonald. Steve Duncombe wrote the book on the left. It's called Dream, Reimagining Progressive Politics in an Age of Fantasy. Really good book, and it's about how the right uses spectacle and fantasy, like the fantasy that we would outlaw all abortions forever. And then you say, well, what about rape and incest? And they go, okay, rape and incest, right? But the idea that like nothing ever, that's the fantasy, or that we will democratize the Middle East through like violence, like that's a fantasy. And they sell that fantasy, and they're really great at it. And how the left can use fantasy in a more ethical way. That's what this book is about. It's a really great book. I highly recommend it. So he's at the bar. I'm at the bar. This guy on the left is at the bar. His name's Andrew Boyd. He started a group called the Billionaires for Bush. So they would go to protests dressed like three-piece suit, like Monopoly-style billionaires, and say it's a class war and we're winning. We need to tax the poor, and campaign for Bush as these sort of cartoon billionaires. This guy, Larry Bogad, he started the clandestine insurgent rebel clown army, who would show up at protests dressed like clowns in army fatigues and try to line up with like cops. And they I don't know, there's a lot of funny stories there. That's Larry. He's at the bar. This guy, Andy from the Yes Men, was there. You guys met him. And so we're hanging out, and we're talking about the Democratic National Convention, which is where they chose Obama, which is not actually a Vegas floor show, despite what it looks like. But outside every year, it's like, since 1968, is protests and violence, right, and fighting. And so Andy's like, hey, what are we going to do for the DNC? Do you want to go to D.C. and we're all going to get arrested? And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. And he's like, what should we do? And I'm intimidated, right? It's like Andrew Boyd, Larry Bogad, Steve Duncombe, Andy. I'm like, well, definitely don't want to do this, right? Go show up with a bunch of signs saying, no, don't stop, and then get arrested. And in fact, the idea that, we just keep doing this over and over again, and it's such an embedded way of, this is how you protest, that in 2008, there was this thing called Recreate 68, which is like, let's just go and, do that whole thing that happened in Chicago where everyone got beat up and arrested. Why? So while we're not innovating in our ideas of protests, the cops are really great at it. They have pepper spray and those orange nets to sweep people up in. This is a free speech zone from the 2008 election where you could go say whatever you want. So again, why? Why are they innovating and why are we not innovating? And so they're like, do you want to go do this thing? Or Andy's like, do you want to go to D.C. and get arrested? No, I don't. And the pressure's on. really intimidating group of people, and it's just me, right? What do you want to do, Steve? And I'm like, let's have a parade. Let's have a parade that celebrates the end of the war. And they'll be like, we'll get marching bands, and they'll come in, they'll play. And then we'll have parachuters come down from the sky, and they'll be like with big American flags celebrating the end of the war. And then there'll be like lasers that shoot and stuff, and dancers and all kinds of stuff. And they were like, awesome. And I was like, okay, how are we going to do this? And it was just like this really crazy vision of this like parade that was going to go down Broadway in New York. And we realized that after a while that was just going to be a huge cop magnet, and everyone would get swept up in those orange nets and put in a free speech zone. But one of the props for the parade was the newspaper, a newspaper that would say Iraq War Over, that we could hold up in pictures. So again, presenting the vision. And so fast forward 8 months, and we had these trucks full of newspapers that said Iraq War Ends. And it was a 14-page paper delivered by these guys. This had shirts or aprons that said New York Times Special Edition. And the special edition was free. So that everyone knew it wasn't real. New York Times never gives away their paper for free. But handing them out the week after Obama was elected on the streets of New York. And what we wanted was like this 15 seconds where they could experience the war being over. And I think I have some video here. Oh, we made a website for it too. This is the actual paper. So there were 14 pages of stories, including like a business section, a local section, national section, all outlining this sort of like what would happen 9 months in the future. Because we handed out November of 2008 and dated it July 4th, 2009. So, the nation set sights on building a sane economy, which includes a true cost tax, salary caps, trust busting. There was a maximum wage law, which actually happened. When any company that got a bailout, there was a maximum salary. And when I saw that in the paper, like I think it was 2 years later, I was like, oh my God, that's crazy. That was like one of the weirdest things we put in there. And then it was real. And then that became real. And I was like, I scooped the Times by 3 years, Anyway, here's a video of Andy and I, and this woman kind of explains the paper.
Barack Obama campaigned on the theme of change, especially when it comes to America's Iraq war strategy. A consistent opponent of the war in Iraq, President-elect Obama campaigned on a phased troop withdrawal. Well, it seems we've just jumped into the future, if that's possible. Take a look at this. This is the New York Times, and we're going to see it in a second, announcing the end of the Iraq War. It's the New York Times, right? Well, maybe not, is it? The paper is actually dated July 4th, 2009, and it was handed out to hundreds of thousands of people. The liberal comedy group called the Yes Men claimed responsibility for this hoax, along with several other anti-war groups. It's an effort to draw a picture of what they hope life may be like under an Obama administration. Now, here's my issue tonight. Yes, this is a hoax, but hopefully it has more than a kernel of truth to it. It would be lovely one day to see a real headline that says war is over. They called World War I the war to end all wars. Obviously it wasn't. Now let's hope this war, based on the faulty premise of weapons of mass destruction, is truly the war to end all wars, even though I know we do need to deal with the Taliban in Afghanistan. Now, I have some fabulous guests joining me who pulled all this off. But first, you have to take a look at this. It's absolutely astounding. It looks just like the real New York Times. 14 pages. I mean, can you tell the difference if you don't see the tight shot? No, I'm looking at it. It looks just like the real New York Times. It's unbelievable. Andy Bickelbaum, one of the leading members of the group Yes Men that pulled off this prank, and Steve Lambert, a senior fellow at the I-Beam Center for Art and Technology, who also...
So I'm just going to show you one really part that's really funny to me, is that we put out this press release that said we handed out 1.2 million copies of the paper, which I never thought anyone would believe. We actually did over 80,000, which was huge, like a huge number of papers, truckloads of papers. But we said 1.2 million because it sounded better, and so she, and this was the first time I heard a media person say that back, and watch my face. Okay.
Played a part in pulling off this hoax. First of all, let's start with you, Andy. How did you pull this off? You printed up more than 1 million copies of this faux paper with the help of thousands of volunteers. How'd you do it?
Well, we wanted to do it.
So that's all online, but you can see it. I was like, do not start laughing, you know. So out of that project, afterwards, you know, we were like it was really great. It went kind of worldwide. We were on the evening news in like Germany, everywhere from like, you know, these like third markets, TV markets in Michigan to like Germany, and we were on the cover of a magazine in Russia. It was crazy. But Andy and I were like, what's going to change though? Like, we want laws to change because of this. Like, we want to see something happen. It was 8 months of work, you know. And when I mean, we would see these sort of hints of things, and they were like, we got these also clues that it had reached policy people. I can't remember his name. Anyway, there was someone that at a journalism conference that held up the paper. He was like, this is the kind of thing we need to be doing. Like, those were really, Bill Moyers held it up at a conference. So I was like, are you serious? You know. So those things were really great, but we're like, what's going to change? And like, just in a way, kind of disappointed in our follow-through on it. And so out of that came the Yes Labs. For Andy went that way. And my side, I started the Center for Artistic Activism with Steve Duncombe. So, yeah, and we work together too. But Yes Labs does these sort of really tactical trainings with, you know, people like, how can you apply these principles with your group? And ours is more like a strategic, like, how do you approach this in a creative way with grassroots activists? So for the last 2 years with, you know, groups in Texas and North Carolina, Steve and I have gone down there and shown them some of the creative work that's been done, and then taught them an approach so that they can do this themselves. Okay, this is something else. And then I just wanted to, the other thing that came out of it was I did a lot of the research on like the wealth inequality parts of the paper, the economic stuff, which was just like, it needed to be done. And I started doing some research and like the maximum wage thing, and I was horrified. So that turned into the project you see outside. Because, you know, like, as I started to learn, like, most people think of capitalism and democracy kind of in a similar light, that capitalism somehow is associated with their freedom, that it's in the U.S. Constitution, which it's not, and that overall it's just a really good thing. And the idea that you could actually sort of question that and start to think about it is very difficult when these are some of the foundation premises of, like, you know, the culture. So this exhibits itself in a lot of ways. This is very simple, and I like to say is if we had a chance to talk to him, I'm sure he could talk us through the concepts here. But the idea that, you know, socialism is just evil, it gets boiled down in these really, and simplified in really weird ways, really disturbing ways sometimes. You know, and again, these extremes are a minority, like, not everybody thinks this, but this is a strain of thinking in the culture, right? So, and what I was interested in, as you can see, is like, how do we start thinking of better ways that the world can work, right? So we're not at the pinnacle of society. We can always be doing better. We can always be making steps towards utopia, right? As it moves back into the distance. So how do we think of these better ways? And came up with this. So to me, this is like directly connected to that newspaper in a way. So it started a year ago in Cleveland. This is it in Cleveland. As you saw out there, you know, it's like very directed at you and your life. It's not like, does capitalism work for the world? Does capitalism work for the country? Does it work in general? Like, because if there's anything I learned from years of therapy, it's like, I feel this way. You know, like when you do that, no one can argue that you're feeling that way. So in my life, capitalism does not work, and like that's true for me. And so, you know, people can vote out there. You can say true or false, and it keeps a tally. So again, it's you know, stated as this assertion, right? It works for me, and then you can agree or disagree, rather than a question, because it's meant to provoke people. And I can show you some of the drafts of like how crappy it was before. I actually have, I don't have the first draft, which is just horrible, ugly. Took a long time to get where it was, and then figuring out the scale of it. This is actually a digital drawing, and then I tried to, that's a tape measure on the ground to see how big it was compared to a car. At the time, it seemed like a good idea to make it this size. I'm not so sure today. And it was all funded on Kickstarter, which I don't want to give you the idea that Kickstarter is a really great thing. It's very complicated, but for this project, it worked out really great because, you know, I could say, help me make capitalism work for me, for one thing. But that it was funded by small donations of people that wanted to see it, and there was this big community, too, that then was involved with the project. So again, built in Cleveland by fabricators, and with every time the sign goes to another place, there's like a community sort of has to develop around it because it's so big. So we had these, you know, people that were working on it. These are the guys in the sign shop. That's Wally Jr. on the left. That's Wally Sr. on the left. He's over 80 years old, and he built that podium outside. So they helped fabricate the whole thing, and then there were some volunteer students from the Cleveland Art Institute. This guy, Woody, who's next to me, on his vacation, he owns that truck. Him and his wife, this was their vacation. It's kind of awesome. Our engineer, the folks at the art space, and so on and so forth. So it's traveling all over the place. So far, it's been to many of the places on the right side. Haven't gotten to Alabama yet. That kind of fell through. But I'm trying to tour it throughout the country. So if you have any ideas where we could take it next, let me know. This is it in Boston, and these are some of the folks who voted. This is a couple. One of them supports the other one. This guy voted false. He works at the local barber college. This woman loves shopping and voted true. That was her reason. I love shopping. This was a family. I love the kid on the left. So I go around and take pictures of the people who voted and ask them why they voted the way they did. And this kid said, in social studies, I'm always against it because everyone is always for it. I was like, right on. You know? This was a couple who, I'll tell you the story real quick and then I'll get to the end. But they owned a nightclub that was part of like a, you know, like Polish American Hall or something in this neighborhood in Cleveland. It was like a really bad neighborhood. They moved in 7 years ago or something, set up the nightclub, a bar. There was a thrift store in it, a restaurant. They employed tons of people. And then the roof went out, and it turned out to be some like, you know, $150,000 or $250,000 repair because it was such a massive building. And so they had like kind of done everything right and transformed the neighborhood. Other businesses moved in. There were like restaurants. It became a district because of their place. And then this was like 2 days before they closed. So they were like, please bring the sign to our club. So there were stories like these. This was a doctor who I asked him, and he said, yeah, it worked for him because people in the United States eat so poorly under capitalism that he's able to do all these amazing surgeries that he wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And the healthcare system funds all this research and stuff. And this guy said, this is Cleveland. Why would I vote true? So anyway, since last summer, some really amazing things happened. You know, like Occupy Wall Street popped up, and it spread across the country. And the conversation has opened up in a variety of different ways, and I hope it continues. It was really great for this sort of become hooked into a much larger movement and conversation. And I realized that with this, like, I can reach people in ways that Occupy couldn't, and you know, captivate them in a different way. So the pieces are meant to be simple but not simplistic, sincere but not serious, and everyone wants to know the score. But I'll make you ask me. That's it. Thanks a lot, you guys. Appreciate it.